pleased that Martha Michael and Ruth Brody Sharone volunteered to lead our meeting this morning. It's a really inspirational movement, and it's around a documentary film that's made called Eternal Song, and I'll let them tell you more about it. But just to give you a brief overview of their bios, Martha says, you might say I'm serially curious. I'm attracted to engaging with people and seeing their experiences from various angles. Consequently, I have found myself in a number of positions with an eclectic skill set. As for educational, professional experience, I originally studied music, but chose instead to earn a bachelor's degree at UCLA in communication studies. I plan to begin a graduate program in clinical psychology in the fall. I worked in fashion, PR, then became a journalist, magazine editor, author before shifting into marketing and digital content creation. I also owned a consignment shop, became involved with seniors, helping them downsize. Oh God, help. Research their genealogy and draft their memoirs. I've been married 40 years and they still like each other. I have 4 children and 1 new grandchild. And Ruth Brody Sharone is an honored internationally for her passionate interfaith activism and leadership. She is a filmmaker, journalist, and author, is also a creator of Meet Me There, the interfaith musical, an exuberant celebration of our cultural and religious diversity. She's served as book writer, composer, lyricist, produced 2 albums with 22 songs, and is currently preparing to take the play to the big stage. She produced and directed the award-winning film God and Allah Need to Talk. Her interfaith memoir, Minefields and Miracles, considered a primer on interfaith engagement, received multiple awards and more than 30 testimonials, including HH, I don't know what that is, the Dalai Lama. Ruth also contributed more than 50 articles to the Interfaith Observer and co-authored the 2018 Amazon bestseller, 21st Century Voices, Women Who Influence, Inspire, and Make a Difference, and recently published 11 Things to Celebrate Before Breakfast, first in a series of 11 short inspirational books. So I just appreciate both Martha and Ruth kind of jumping in with this material. I was so inspired by the film, but they really have taken it on. So with that, please begin.
Good evening, everyone.
Ruth and I have talked for a total of about 5 minutes, so I hope we're organized enough for you guys.
We both agreed we wanted to do it together, so this is going to be a fun experience. Trailer talking about the entire week. So Mary Grace mentioned the title, The Eternal Song, and the subtitle, which I think is really crucial before we share our thoughts, is called Ancient Wisdom for Collective Healing. And the more or less the order of the day is that I'm going to share the trailer with all of you, and Martha then is going to speak about her experience of not just viewing the film, but subsequent conversations that were held all week long with Indigenous leaders, psychologists, grief experts, etc. And then after that, I will share some of the thoughts. I wrote down some of the actual dialogue between some of the speakers because I was so profoundly moved by it. Just something about the filmmakers themselves, Zaya and Mauricio Benazzo. She's Bulgarian. Originally, she is an engineer as well as an environment specialist, and Maurizio is from Italy. And they formed an organization called SAND, which stands for Science and Non-Duality. and they've made other films together, but this is, I understand yesterday I was listening to them speak, this is the culmination of 15 years of work in this area of, and it's one of the most comprehensive studies of indigenous wisdom on the idea of grief, how to express it, how to deal with it, how to resolve it, and how to learn from it. So this is the trailer, and the film itself. Just I mentioned this to Mary Grace yesterday, that it's possible to acquire the entire collection. That there will be 11 more films coming out. It's possible to acquire the whole collection for $200, and it's something that we might want to consider acquiring for us to use as a resource. We can talk about that another time, but just if any of you are so moved and want to acquire the collection, you can just go online to their website and do that. And if anybody would like to organize a screening for a different community, or your own, whether religious community or social activity, whatever it is, you can arrange to see the film for a donation of any amount, meaning they suggest how much they would like you to give, but if you can't afford that, they're open to that. They're really interested in getting this material out. So I'm going to share my screen now, and hopefully everything will go well and we'll be able to see the trailer.
I think it's at the bottom. Okay.
We were co-creators. We moved with the creation energy.
We are gifts from the stars who have become earth beings.
Ko hau ko te whenua, ko te whenua ko hau. We are the land.
The people who were living here were understanding themselves as being beauty, and the people who were coming from Europe were understanding themselves as being in sin.
A igreja chegou no nosso meio, pediu para nós fechar o nosso olho.
So we closed our eyes and bowed our head. By the time we opened our eyes, our land was gone.
And when you remove the people from the connection to the land, you're taking away the heart and soul of the people.
Who are we in this world when the structure is built for someone else? That is a curse.
You cannot reverse a curse. A curse can only be transformed.
Sometimes we have to bring something incomprehensible into the world.
Healing is intergenerational, but it's also multi-generational.
You are so connected to those that came before you. If you call, they will come. Trust them.
Share your experience of the week with us.
Thank you for sharing that, Ruth, sharing your screen. And I come to you from what is now called the Santa Clarita Valley, which was previously the home of the Tataviam. And I I can't remember the last time I participated in something so immersive to spend almost a week. I mean, I attended a lot of the discussion, over 20, probably 25. So I could probably monologue for 3 hours if you really want to know more. So first of all, there were some, I mean, the overarching themes are clearly trauma, what to do with their many generations of trauma due to colonization, and then their treatment when mostly Europeans came and decided to take the land. And what I loved about the film, it was really, really inspirational. It just because they went around the world, which is why they have so many more films coming out, is because they realized they need more time with each group. But you heard from people from New Zealand, Brazil, Greenland, uh, obviously the United States, Hawaii, I mean, all over the world. And so it opened my mind to much more than what I'd previously been exposed to, which was the Native American experience. So they talked about how they're internalizing distress and I really liked, there was one clip that I liked in particular where she described what happened with each generation. And so there was the colonists or the explorers, would come and how she said they would, kill the men and rape the women. And then those who survived that, the next generation, the men, and enslave them. And then the men would take out their distress on the wives. And then the next generation, she brought up, the introduction of alcohol and what that did to their people. And then the next generation, they start to take it out on the children. And I was struck by the discussions around trauma, how much pedophilia they brought up. A number of the experts and the elders and these leaders had experienced themselves being molested by their fathers, and there was a lot of it. And so this was how they explained how it had come about. And they were really, really they were super, I thought, they weren't judgy or they weren't blaming. And they were saying we're all in this together. And I loved what someone brought up, that we're all, even Europeans were escaping famine, persecution, war, that, we were refugees we were in catastrophic circumstances, whatever. And they even helped, they even talked about like the Irish, or they talked about in the UK witch burnings and saying, look, if you look back far enough, we're all indigenous somewhere and we've all have this trauma. And so I thought it was really, they weren't trying to create white guilt, if you will. And they talked a lot about community, and they were kind of contrasting that with how we're so focused here in the US on individual healing and therapy, individual therapy. And they're really encouraging community healing as communities, and that they have a very communal way of existing. And you saw a little bit of, they're also they're open to less conventional treatments. Like you saw a little bit of that hands-on, I think she was Maori, hands-on healing that she does. It was very dramatic in the film. And they had Richard Schwartz. Some of you are probably familiar with, he created internal family systems, and he's really big on bringing in the ancestors, as were a lot of the indigenous people in the various groups, talked about bringing your ancestors in, inviting them to help you. And I guess Schwartz invites in the ancestors of his clients. And he said that people watch their ancestors' trauma, and when the ancestors feel seen, the client then can also be unburdened. I liked his term. He called it cultural legacy burdens. and said we all have all kinds of exiled parts, and this is how we get integration. And then the one I was the most interested in, because I'm really interested in religious trauma and I have an evangelical background. So I was really interested in the talk on reconciling indigenous spirit and Christianity, which is what it was called. And the actual discussion group, I didn't get that much out of, honestly. One of the women she's actually getting a PhD at Grand Canyon University, which is a Christian university, and she's an indigenous. I can't remember where she's from, but her Wi-Fi, she was on a reservation and the Wi-Fi isn't good, and she dropped out of the conversation, so we lost a lot that way. But they did bring up Christianity throughout, and it was really helpful to me. They were able to weave together like different lenses and belief systems, I felt, to even ones they've been hurt by. There were a number of groups involving people who are working with the Catholic Church, and then the kind of, they said, one of them referred to it as reweaving ancestral traditions without reenacting colonial harm. And I thought that was, I like the wording there. And they had a session called Reclaiming Our Spiritual Traditions. And so I learned a lot there. And they were reconnecting with pre-Christian European spiritual practices. And they honoring ceremony. They talked about ceremony a lot. And I really liked, I was going to share with you, Loretta Afraid of Bear. And she is oh gosh, Lakota. And she said they remember, relearn, and share the traditions to put their own perspective back. And she works a lot with youth, and where she says there's so much substance abuse, teen pregnancy, depression, and they use ceremony like Vision Quest and the Sweat Lodge. And that seems to be another like commonly repeated way to address, and to communally find healing is through their ceremony. It was really important to them. And probably the other most notable avenue is nature. And so I learned a lot about, I'm seeing nature differently after attending these groups, because they would speak to each other, to the hosts, to people who weren't related to them, as sisters and brothers. And it was always, oh yes, sister. Oh, this is my big sister. And talked as we are related to one another, but they also they called the plants and animals their relatives too. And so I'm really thinking about my attitude and the way I address nature as a result. But they're saying, take off your shoes and go out and stand in nature, step on the ground, instead of always being on concrete or always being indoors. And that they feel that's another way for them to reach, to get to a place of healing from some of the trauma. Ruth?
It was so good to hear that, because we were not at the same chats, the after chat, but the general theme, I got that same idea about the collective nature of what they're trying to do now, and I wanted to share with all of you this. Let me bring that up on the screen. I was at a after chat that featured Orland Bishop. I don't know whether any of you know him. He's here in Los Angeles. He's originally from British Guiana. He works with gangs, and he's a philosopher who works with gangs, which I find fascinating. He's very soft-spoken, pensive, and eloquent in the way he expresses himself. And and he brings that quality with him when he's working with people. So immediately and he deals with so much violence among the young people. So his manner is just so healing. Anyway, I want to just read some of the quotes that I copied down that I think are important for all of us to consider right now. And this is from Orland Bishop. We are exploring a history of our existence with life, trying to make sense of existence. Source has never been interrupted, but there is an ongoing evolution of reality through human beings witnessing of its miracles and magic. Human beings didn't have to do anything about what was happening, but rituals, and this is key, and I'm interjecting this here because of what Martha just said, because of the emphasis on rituals in the indigenous communities. And here he says, rituals were to actually receive more and to stay within their flow. Human beings forgot some very fundamental relationship to that natural reality. They fell into existence as a separate reality. So what many of the speakers were pointing out is that we are individual-centric today. And especially Americans are known for their strident individualism in economics and the way they live in the Wild West and how it was won and so forth. And so he says what happens in some parts is that existence became a search for self-interest, self-survival, and parameters between what was the edge of what was the known and the mystery that continued to be true. Colonization occurred in the population that had forgotten the rituals of belonging. I'm going to say that again. I think that's such an important concept. Colonization occurred in the population that had forgotten the rituals of belonging. This intellectualization, what they're searching for, really is the sacred. To perfect the world as how I think it is actually the colonization. To perfect the world as how I think about it is actually colonization. You cannot think nature, you have to feel nature. To think is to forget. The other person that was in that same after chat was Francis Weller. Many of you may have heard about him. He was new to me, but I think people who are in the field of psychology know about Francis Weller. I'm trying to remember the name of the book he wrote about grief. I think it's called The Wild Side of Grief. And here are some of his thoughts. It's so important to communalize grief. Generations of grief that has accumulated. Grief is not here to take us hostage, but it is one of the most helpful elemental emotions of our lives. We have to give permission to one another to go there. Tonight, the topic is loss. Grief is not a problem to be solved. It is a presence to be witnessed. When we bring warmth to this territory, warmth, kindness, affection, and we do that so this place might exist. Grief wants company. Now, under the weight of capitalism, individualism, we've been forced to experience it on our own. Our grief is entangled with one another's grief. We share a communal cup of grief, so we need to get together continuously, not to empty that cup, but to love each other more fully. And he suggested that, actually it reminds me a lot of what we do in Mastery Circle, coming together and when having our private time to talk about what's going on with us. He suggested people come together just for the purpose of being able to share loss in their lives, just periodically, but on a regular basis. And then he coined a term which I think many of us are experiencing viscerally and about what's going on right now in the world. He called it the long dark. We are entering the long dark, a holy time when things decay, break apart, when racism must break down, gender conflict, economic differences. If we make it to the far side of that time, and that will take at least 2 generations, he says, we might see a healthy living culture again. We are being asked to being ripened as human beings, to emerge into our adult self. Trauma and uncertainty can activate very young parts of us, and we can go into denial. But we are at a threshold time in our collective life, and we are being asked through initiation to emerge into our adult self, to show up as what it is being asked for us to do. He made reference to a book by Dwayne Elgin called Choosing Earth, where in the book he talks about the next 5 decades and what we can learn in the next 5 decades. And he talks about the level of loss, death, and suffering that is going to be very, very strong, and to be prepared for that. This is a rough initiation, Francis Weller says. And here again, the idea of ritual is so essential. He says most rituals are a contained encounter with death. But we, right now, because we don't have ritual, we are within an uncontained encounter with death. We are being pushed to the edge of extermination. There is no answer, but there is a response. We need everyone's medicine, but only the adults can deliver the blessing and the medicine. There's one last comment from Lucy. It's 8:28. There's one last comment from Orlando Bishop that I want to share, and then I'm going to ask Martha a question and all of you a question to think about, and maybe you can respond today. Orlando Bishop says, "The belief that something will save me has ended. The human being is being given something that nature can't give us, our shadow. We've accumulated a lot of wounds from family and society. This is the inner darkness that becomes the resource for a new civilization. We are creating ourselves for the first time. We are receiving something from each other which is not being given by the Divine One. We are receiving something from each other which is not being given by the Divine One. The active will is the critical part of what we have to do. Am I choosing a level of bonding in which I will include you? We are in the tension between abundance and scarcity. We don't want to include other people in it. There will be no psychology of trauma to the degree I can predict behavior and likelihood of my own survival. If the shadow is to become enlivened with purpose, we need to understand the abundance. If we think our body is only inherited space, but it has diversity of feeling, of relationships, that is our ecology in consciousness. We have to do it with the unconsciousness of our shared lives and develop a way of turning it into consciousness. We have to create a governance model in which abundance is true. So here's my question to you, Martha, and to the rest of the group. What is the eternal song for you? What is the eternal song?
I'll answer your question, but I did want to say something you brought up before. Was that I think they even kicked it off by saying it's not a time to solve, it's a time to remember. So, and I guess I can weave that into my answer. But that was their how they wanted to address this trauma and these generations of trauma was to remember and to bring into the present what's happened and to be honest about it and to have a safe space to this was like a really large safe space for them to finally bring these things up. And Ruth and I talked about Pat McCabe. She's one of the better known women. She's Woman Stands Shining is her name, her indigenous name in English. And she said there were times like she'd have to go to the ocean, and she would have to vomit and cry, and because it's bringing up so much for her. But she said I really like that she said, we're being seen, heard, and believed, and that's what's bringing them the healing. But that I am going to weave that into my answer. My answer, I think the eternal song is just this through line they're talking about, where this existence and this it's an ongoing, this life force that they kept saying we're in this, where we use this idea of time, but if you kind of do away with that idea of time, it's before, it's now, it's ahead of us. It's all this long through line of the life we're meant to, that we've been given, and that responsibility, and that as long as we remember, then this is an eternal, and the eternal messaging of hope and health, and that's what I think they meant.
Someone else like to take on that question?
I think that my eternal song are the words of my daughter and the wisdom and guidance of her, because what she sees and hears and feels is important to me, and I need to validate that and listen to her and know that she's guided by the same source, creator, life that I am, and know that we're walking in our experience together. So I'm just the portal she came through, but I'm also a guide too. So just walking in that and knowing that we're protected and loved.
Before I call the next person, I just want to share one of the things that came out in the film, in the chats. And it will be in a later film coming out about the Haida people in a tribe in Africa, that the custom is that when it's time for a woman to have a baby, she goes to the forest and she sits under a tree and she waits until she hears the song of the child she's supposed to bring in the world. And she hears that song, she goes back to the village and she chooses the man she's going to mate with to have that child, and she teaches him the song of the child that she heard. And they continue singing that song all the time the child is in utero, so that when he is born and comes out, he will recognize that song from his parents. And they continue singing that song and learning the songs of other people in the tribe. And at tribal celebrations or marriages or whatever, they honor the people by singing their song to them. And if that person, it happens that they commit what's considered a sin or a crime or something against the tribe itself, They all gather together in the center of the village, and they bring in the person, and they come up to him and they sing him his song. There's no punishment. They sing him his song to remind him of who he is. And so, Jasmine, when you said about you listened to your daughter's song, it reminded me of this such a beautiful story. If we could remember that about, discovering our own song and how to sing someone else's song to him, to her, to remind them. Would somebody else like to answer that question? What do you think is the eternal song?
Patricia has her hand up.
Well, what you just told us is so emotional. Oh, beautiful story. It reminds me of your talk. Reminded me of this African way of saying hello, a greeting that says, "My ancestors and my descendants say hello to you." So they are already feeling in community with their ancestors and their future generations. And that really affects one's perspective of life. So I wanted to bring this up. The eternal song is a forever hello.
Nita has her hand up.
I wanted to bring what I read this morning. I want to repeat the last two sentences because I think the eternal song, to quote, "Till suddenly they took heart and sang from many throats joyously together, as birds are known to sing. They sang because life is sweet and sunlight beautiful. They sang under the brooding shadow of the raven. In simple truth, they had forgotten the raven, for they are the singers of life and not of death." And that reminds me of what you've been talking about. I think these people are the singers of life. The eternal song is what keeps us going.
Amy.
I could not agree more. In my whole and my it's like all my ancestors are here right now. When you said that, I was writing down something before when you started speaking about the cultural systems within our own lineage, and it's like when you get on that thought, everything else lines up. And Jasmine, the thought that our daughters or our sons that we bring to life, they're not us, and they have their own story and they have their own thoughts and timeline. And sometimes it's like taking just bitter medicine to hear their thoughts of what's happening and how they're perceiving it, and allowing the space for what they're feeling to just be without having to mold it differently is truly, it's medicine. And I knew my daughter's name when I was 5 years old. I said, I one day will have a daughter and I will name her Miranda after my favorite babysitter. So the thought of this child has been with me since I was 5. It's otherworldly to me. So thank you for this wonderful conversation, Ruth and Martha and the Mastery Circle, for bringing this.
Anything else? Is our time up? I wanted to add one more thing that I think it was Pat McCabe. I love her native name, Woman Stands Shining. She really is light in the Indigenous community here in America and worldwide. When they talked about forgiveness also as an aspect of what the Indigenous community is cultivating, and Gabor Mate said to the white civilization, or to the colonizers, the children of the colonizer, he said, you do not have the luxury of being able to blame yourselves for what your ancestors did. The question is, what are you going to do to change it? And just his use of the words, the luxury of blame, right? Like once you've put yourself in that position, then that in a sense is what you're doing to make a difference, but that is not what is being asked of us. He's asked, what can we do now to make a difference? And the indigenous, one of the indigenous elders said that even though I forgave, it's not over. I have to forgive every day. Forgiveness is not an act that purges or wipes out the act. And so I have to go through the exercise of forgiving on a daily basis to be in a state of forgiveness. I never thought about that before, but I think that is really true. And so I urge you all, when you have a chance to, go online, get to see this film, the first one in a series of total of 12 films. And maybe we can talk about acquiring all of them for us in some way. I don't know whether you've ever had, I think you did have an archive at one point. Is that right, Mary Grace? No, you didn't, but anyway. So
I actually sent you a detailed email about that.
Martha, do you have any closing thoughts?
You have about 8 more minutes.
Oh, okay. If anybody else wants to.
Yeah, can I just say, I downloaded a workbook too. There was a download of a work. So I have that if anyone wants it. And it actually had, the last day they talked about taking action. And there was a really good discussion on wealth. It was really, it was a little bit heady, but one of the things they brought up, I wrote down, was because they're working on community building and addressing poverty and inequality. And one of them said, we need to lay down the addiction to comfort and consumption and sit with such questions as, to what do I feel entitled? Because if you're like me, you're asking, okay, so what should I do? I mean, I'm of European descent, and in the workbook, I actually kept it open so I could tell you guys. In that workbook, they have how could you carry forward what this film stirred in you? And there's a whole list. Learn whose ancestral lands you're on, et cetera, et cetera. Protect sacred sites. So if anyone is interested, I'd be happy to just email you the workbook.
Tricia?
When Martha was talking about religion of the colonized, it reminded me when I went to Chiapas, the southernmost state in Mexico at the border with Guatemala. And we went to this small church, and there were Mayans with their Mayan clothes and hand-woven clothes. And I heard them praying in their language. So we were traveling with some artists from Mexico City, and they told us that they became Catholic when they were colonized, but then they go home and they have their gods. They worship both. So they have both religions. That's how. That's what's
happening.
Excuse me?
Indigenous grandmothers get together every year in different places around the world. And some of them from Latin America, when they do prayers, they incorporate prayers from the Christian Bible. And they have learned how to integrate
both
things together. It's kind of startling at the beginning, you don't expect them to be quoting from the Bible and talking about Jesus. But one of the things I discovered when I was doing research for my musical and consulting with Indigenous elders and historians, when I asked someone who was a historian for the Apache tribe, whether there was a chance I could speak to the elders, he said they wouldn't want to speak to you. And I said, why is that? He said, because the questions that white people ask are not appropriate. What? I said, like what? He said, like when you ask about their religion, they don't consider their beliefs a religion. They consider it a way of life, an understanding about their connection to the earth. And so when you ask, what is your religion? So the answer is, my religion, if you want to call it that, is the sparkle of the sun on the water. It's trees. It's a different frame of reference. And so when approaching this work of reconciliation and forgiveness, I think we need to also qualify our terms, the terms we use, and learn what it does it mean to the other people who are listening, because we have very strong ideas of what it's supposed to mean, and it's not the same for them. So, and is there anybody else who would like to comment or answer about the Eternal Song?
Just agree with Ruth. I think that it is definitely language and communication, how it's interpreted and how you say it and how things are, how it transmuted, because that's powerful too. What's your meaning behind questioning, and for what purpose it does resonate. So thank you, Ruth.
Ruth, one thing I would just add, if I could, is that when I was storytelling in little village schools in Alaska, people were denied the opportunity for many, many years to even speak in their native language. They had to speak English. They had to go to the schools that were government run that, denied them their own identity. And one of the things that was so impressive to me was the changes that were occurring even from the time I grew up in Alaska as a child and going there as an adult and seeing both languages and Yupik, for example, or English, both of them being present in everything I looked at, whether it was the framing over a door and to a school, to what I saw on on the blackboards. It was this embracing of that identity that had been lost. But also seeing the tragedy of one young woman, going to nursing school and not being able to make the adjustment and committing suicide, and then 4 suicides followed in one village that I was talking to one of the village elders, and this sense of who am I and where do I come from? And so thank you so much for this, because this is reminding me of a lot of things and conversations, and even having just been in the jungle, understanding that our connection to the earth, to each other, to our ancestors is so important. And you've brought that forward today. So I really thank you for that, Martha and Ruth. This has been wonderful.
Michelle, they underscored that so much, that their culture was taken away largely due to the language. Sending them to the schools was a huge trauma. Yeah, exactly.
Horrifying.
Punishments. I don't want to get too gruesome here, but they used to physically harm the children for speaking their own language.
That's right.
Pull out their nails, or they would do something horrific,
That's right.
make it.
That's right. So
some people just ended up being silent. Some of the children just ended up being silent and not learning any language, and the discovery I made about 15 years ago when I went to an interfaith conference in Canada, in Toronto, was that this was happening not just in America. This was happening in Canada. It was happening in Australia. It was happening in many parts of the world. And at the Parliament of the World's Religions in I believe it was in Australia, three Catholic priests were giving a talk, and someone barged in the middle. It was an Aborigine from Australia who came to call them to task for what the Catholic Church did. And that because there had never been, like, now people are becoming aware of what happened and the extent of it, the depth of it, the scarring of it, and are addressing it more. But someone interrupted an international conference, came in off the street because he heard about that there were going to be people there from the Catholic Church to say, "What did you do?" And the priests, they didn't do it, but that was their ancestors. So there it was. Everybody was shocked and sat in silence. Nobody knew what to do. But I think now people are beginning to see, and this, like you described, the workbook and the indigenous people telling us that first of all, they need to be able to share openly about it, but in community.
That's right.
It's not about inviting one indigenous person to a group of people and just talking about their history. It's much more than that.
Right. Hey, Ruth, Judy had her hand up.
Oh, sorry, Judy.
Oh, what was I going to say? Oh, I was just thinking if religion could be looked at by every one of us as the sparkle of the water or anything in nature, why would there be any more war?
Mm-hmm.
We have no reason to fight because someone's Jewish or whatever. I mean, it just extends forever. What's going on right now, so much of it is about someone who just doesn't believe what we believe, and it's so sickening. Anyway, that's just my thought. And I was also the eternal song in my family. When my parents escaped from Poland before the war began, they brought a candelabra with them, and although it's materialistic, it was an emblem of light. and we've had that at our seders since 1905 when they brought that, and every single seder we lit it up, and it reminded us, along with the whole lecture of the seder, of what our ancestors went through, and that we got to keep that. They brought that over on the boat. I don't know if they brought anything else but the candelabra. So that was our greatest treasure. And it was, I guess you could say, Ruth, that it was sort of like the song that they brought, the eternal song.
Beautiful.
The flame. Yeah. And with that, we have to conclude today. Ruth and Martha, thank you so much. This has been very moving and informative. And we have, I get it's going to take generations. And it begins with each one of us each day as we move in our circle of influence. Thank you very, very much.